Hi VC, it's Rob here with another video, and this video is going to be my top 10 albums from 2019. So I've seen one or two people showing their favourite albums from 2019. Sam, Vinyl Douche, John, Digital Gramophone, and Mazzy, showing a stack of stuff. So I thought I'd just have mine as a top 10. Sort of streamline it, and also it's a bit more fun when you do it in a chart form, and next year I can sort of look back on it and see whether some of these albums have kind of changed positions, which I fully expect. So let's get cracking. And number 10 for 2019 is this album. It's Giants of All Sizes by Elbow. So Elbow, when I did my list of favourite bands, artists, etc., I had Elbow at number 5. That's how much I like Elbow from Manchester. Guy Garvey, of course, lead singer, very personable songwriter that I sort of have a bit of an affinity with. Sort of songs speak to me really. I've been into Elbow since about 2010 maybe. They'd released a couple of albums before I kind of really got into them. Seldom Seen Kid was the first album that I really got into. They made a really a big impression at Glastonbury, I think in about 2010, and since then the career's sort of got a lot of momentum. They've reached a lot of people, and this album came out a couple of months ago, and like all Elbow's albums, they kind of you need to give them a bit of time. They're not kind of immediate songs, hence this album's only at number 10. I fully expect this time next year this album probably moved up a few places. I don't rate it as highly as the last album, Little Fictions, but it still makes it into my top 10. So yeah, Giants of All Sizes by Elbow. Now, my number 9 record is this album, and it's by Young Husband, and it's called Swimmers. So Young Husband are a band that I didn't really know that much about. They're from the UK, from sort of I think Herefordshire, and this album has not sort of pulled up any trees commercially, and it just reminds me, I wasn't going to have this in my top 10, but I played it again yesterday. I've been shuffling around my order. It sort of changes on a daily basis, and this one has got into my top 10. I was listening to it last night, and it's kind of, it is sort of inoffensive indie guitar pop really, but it's just like the sort of music that I was listening to when I was about 25 in the late 80s. It sort of reminds me a little bit of a band called the Weather Prophets, who did an album called Mayflower, that I'm always going back to. So, I mean, it's not had high critical acclaim. The reviews I've read about it have been not that supportive, but for me it's just a really good sort of indie album, and I continue to enjoy it. So yeah, I've made it my number 9. So yeah, Young Husband and Swimmers. Now at number 8 is this album, and it's Stars Are the Light by Moon Duo. So Moon Duo, clues in the name, Ridley Johnson, the guy from Wooden Ships, and his wife, they're Moon Duo, and I think this is maybe the 7th or 8th album. Discovered it on Apple Music. Like a lot of music, I listen to new releases, so every Friday I sort of digest the new releases, listen to most things, and then those that make the cut I tend to buy on album. So I listen to them quite a bit on Apple Music before I purchase them. This album came out of nowhere for me really. I wasn't really aware of Moon Duo. I wasn't really aware of Wooden Ships. since I bought this album, I've been listening to Wooden Ships and bought one of the most recent album from 2018. But this is an album that I've really enjoyed this year. I've only had it for about 3 months. Psychedelic, dream pop, just really this year for me has been all about sort of dream pop, psychedelic pop. I've really discovered some really good albums, and like I say, through Apple Music, listening to new releases every week, and I've discovered some great stuff. So yeah, this one reaches number 8 in my charts, and it's Moonjo and Stars Are the Light. Now, my number 7 is this album, and it's Loops in the Secret Society by Jane Weaver. So this comes in double format. I've actually had it signed by Jane. I went to see Jane in August, and she did this album front to back, and live it was great. I mean, actually one of my, certainly probably my favourite gig of the year, and her 2 albums before this are kind of fluxed into this album, a real electronic sort of feel to it. When I went to see it, I was shocked really how much I enjoyed it. I took my son came with me, and he's sort of into sort of hypnotic sort of electronic music, and this is certainly that. The more you play it, the more you sort of it's a good album to just have on in the background really, and just pick up threads from it while you're going around going about your everyday duties. But that's not a criticism. It's a good album by an artist who is in her late 40s, and when I went to see her, she's kind of on stage a little bit apologetic, you know. She's not charismatic in any way, but she produces the goods. She's got a pretty dedicated fan base who you know, can't wait for her new releases. I'm expecting her to release something this year. So yeah, Jane Weaver, if you're not aware of her, I really recommend you maybe check her out. So yeah, this album, Loops in the Secret Society, and it's my number 7. Now, my number 6 is this album, and it's The National, and I Am Easy to Find. So again, I went to see The National this year, and I saw them in 2013, and I was shocked how great they were in a small venue. I saw them in an outdoor venue in Manchester on a very sort of cold, dark, damp evening, and that gig wasn't showcasing this album at its best really. I think it needed to be in a more intimate arena really. But there's a few songs on this album, kind of Rylan and Light Years, that kind of, to me, they're more like what you'd expect from The National. But this album's sort of gone in a little bit of a different direction, with 4 or 5 female vocalists sort of adding to the band's sound, and it's not instant. When you first hear this album, you're sort of thinking, you know, what direction are you going in? But the more you listen to it, the more I'm expecting this to be way up this time next year, because it's been moving up the charts quite quickly over the last couple of weeks, but it's only made number 6. So yeah, The National and I Am Easy to Find. Now we're into the top 5, and it's this album, and it's Jay Som and Anak KO. So I think I've had this album maybe 5 or 6 months. I did what I explained earlier, went on Apple Music, and I saw this cover, got my attention, and listened to it, and I loved it straight away. Very sort of, the songs are very sort of catchy and immediate, and a few friends of mine who weren't aware of Jay Som have got into this album as well. You know, the critics have been quick to praise it as well. Jay Som when she was young, she wasn't encouraged to be a musician really. It was only when she went to college and she kind of discovered herself really. And after attempting a full-time job, she went by. She did a few gigs and got picked up. And I'm expecting this album to be critically acclaimed this year, and I'm expecting good things from Jay. Some sort of new wave bedroom pop. But this album's full of immediate songs, very accessible and very enjoyable. So yeah, my number 5 is Jay Som and Anak KO. Now, my number 4 is a debut album by a band called Divino Nino, and this album is called Foam. So as soon as I heard this album, it reminded me of the Super Furry Animals, even the artwork really, you'd expect from the Super Furries, Griff Rhys. And this album is another album that's very accessible, and a very happy sounding album. The sort of album you just put on and sort of drift off, go into happy places, maybe with the help of illicit substances maybe, but that's not my kind of thing. But if that's your bag. 2 guys from Colombia and 2 guys from Chicago, and that's where they're based. And for a debut album, it's very crisp sounding, and yeah, I can't really find fault with it really. It's my number 4 for 2019. It's Divino Nino, and the album is called Foam. Now we're into the top 3, and my number 3 is this album, and it's Fishing for Fishes by King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard. So King Gizzard, I can't remember how many albums they've done. I think this is maybe the 19th album. Again, sort of this is sort of blues boogie sound to it, with a psychedelic edge as you'd expect. I think maybe 19 albums released. They released an album later in the year, Infest the Rat's Nest, which is a thrash metal album, which you'd expect I wouldn't like, but I actually do like it. But this album is very sort of, again, this was kind of the first King Gizzard album that I bought from hearing it straight away. So much of the other material I've had to sort of backtrack on. My son has been a big fan of them for probably about 5 years, and he's got every release by them. I've got about 5 albums by them now, and when I went to see them live a couple of months ago, 2 drummers, great rhythm section, harmonica, great vocals, just a happy time, really exciting and sort of experimental. This album is quite sort of formulated in a way. It's a lot of King Gizzard fans aren't massive fans of this album, but for me, just sort of was released at the right time, and yeah, it's made my number 3. So yeah, King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard, and Fishing for Fishes. So we're into the top 2 now, and both of these albums are debut albums. So yeah, my number 2 is this album, and it's Grace Lightman, and this album is called, I always kind of forget, it's called Silver Eater, sorry about that. And Silver Eater, this album, when I was sort of discovering this album, I mean, that cover gets anyone's attention. So I gave it a good listen, and straight away, I just loved it. It's quite commercial, it's quite poppy really, but with a kind of psychedelic sort of electronic feel. But the songs take you, I mean, Silver Eater is an alien who's come down to Earth and falls in love with the human race. So from Repair to Silver Eater, right through the album. I've played this album so much. This year has been, for me, there's been some great albums released. I know every year people will sit down and say, it's not been a classic year and music's deteriorating from the 60s, 70s, etc. But if you dig down, you don't have to go that far to find great music. And for a debut album, I mean, Grace has been supporting a few bands and doing sort of a few mini festivals over the summer. I'm hoping and expecting that she's going to go on a tour of her own in the new year. And this is an album I recommend. It's one of those albums that you think, well, why do I like it? You know, it's a bit poppy, it's a bit dancey, it's a bit of nothing really. But I've played it so much, and every time I play it, I really enjoy it. So it was close to being my number one, but it's my number two, and it's Grace Lightman and Silver Eater. So, drum roll, number one. What can it be? It's an album that I've only owned for a month, and it's this album, W.H. Long, and it's called Incidental Music. So it's got 8 tracks on this album, plays at 45, 2 tracks on each side. And W.H. Long is a Chinese sort of supermarket in Manchester. That's where the band got the name from. So it's 3 guys from Manchester, all sort of in their early 20s. And this was, listening to this album, a guy at work sort of pointed me in this direction, and I gave it a listen, and I had to go and buy it straight away. It really takes me back to, at the start of it, it's very kind of, reminds me of sort of Joy Division, krautrock, that kind of sound, electronic, hypnotic, ticks all the boxes for the stuff I've been listening to this year really. But then it kind of also has influences of sort of the Stone Roses Manchester sound. It just really sounds like a Manchester band, and you know, I'm not picking it just because it is a Manchester band, but it does help. And it's an album that I've been playing and playing and playing, and I've only had it for about 3 weeks, and it's made it to be my favourite album of the year. So yeah, it's W.H. Long, and this album is called Incidental Music. So those are my top 10 albums for 2019. I think I bought over 20 albums, but I didn't want to just do all 20. I just wanted to pick my favourite 10. There are 1 or 2 albums that probably would have made this list, but I've not picked those albums up yet, so in the new year I'm sure I will. So that's it from me. Hope you've enjoyed my top 10. I enjoy watching anyone do a top 10 of 2019. It's just really interesting for me to see people's favourite albums. So thanks for watching this video. If you've got any comments on what your favourite albums are, or if you've given the ones I've shown a listen and what you think of them, I'd love to hear from you. So that's it from me, and bye for now.